Hello everyone, my name is Rachel. Welcome back to my channel. Today I am bringing you guys my end of July reading wrap up. If you want to hear all of my thoughts about the books that I read in the first half of July, I will link my July mid-month wrap up in the cards above. So today I think I have about 11 books to talk about. So without further ado, let's just get into it. Unfortunately, the first book I have to talk about is a DNF. I haven't DNF'd a book in a little while now that I'm thinking about it, but this one is a book that I was really looking forward to. I thought I was actually going to love it and give it 5 stars. And obviously that didn't happen. So the book I'm talking about is The Lady's Guide to Celestial Mechanics. This is by Olivia Waite. It is a female-female historical romance. I'm gonna give a short synopsis of this book because I don't want to talk about it too long, but it centers around Lucy. She's a very scientifically minded person, as you can probably tell from the title of Celestial Mechanics. Then we have Catherine, who is a countess. She's recently widowed, and Lucy essentially ends up moving in with Catherine because Lucy is trying to translate this book of astronomy that was written by this French guy, but she needs financial help to do that, and so Catherine is providing that financial help, and a romance of course ensues between the two of them. I really wanted to love this. In the first 25%, I was really in it. I liked both of their characters. I felt that the buildup of tension and chemistry was well done. And then at about the 25 to 30% mark, they just like immediately started a relationship, immediately jumped into bed with one another, and like that was it. The romance was pretty much a done deal. So then for the rest of the book that I read, I DNF'd this at about the 57% mark. It was centered on the subplot of her translating this French guy's work and dealing with other people in the scientific community and things like that. So I was very disappointed that the romance developed so quickly. I really wanted this to be a slow burn. I wanted this to be just a beautiful buildup of a relationship between these two characters, and unfortunately that's just not what this is. This book I want to discuss is An Ember in the Ashes by Sabatier. Of course, this is book 1 in her The Ember in the Ashes series. I enjoyed this a lot. I ended up giving it 4 stars. Just to give you a brief synopsis, we are in the Martial Empire, which is inspired by the Roman Empire, and we have Laia. I'm pretty sure that's how her name was pronounced on the audiobook. Her brother has just been arrested for treason, and she ends up risking her life to spy for the rebel cause that her brother was a part of. So she becomes a slave and goes into the Martial Empire's military academy. And we have Elias, who is a soldier at this military academy. He is just about to graduate. And so we essentially follow their 2 POVs, and they do end up crossing paths at one point in this book. Like I said, I enjoyed this. I think this was a very solid start to what I think is going to be a very solid YA fantasy series. I do kind of wish that the world that this takes place in had a bit more depth to it. I'm assuming that this world is going to grow more and more as we go along in the series. You know, this is only the first book. So I do think that Sabatier focused more on developing the characters and not so much the fantastical world. So I'm hoping that we get more of that in book 2. I do think that's why I didn't give this 5 stars or anything, but like I said, the story is very solid. It's also very easy to understand and follow along with what's going on. I like her writing style a lot. So yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to continuing on with this series this month. Next book I want to talk about is It Takes Two to Tumble. This is by Kat Sebastian. This is my second book of hers that I've read. I read Two Rogues Make a Right earlier this month, which is actually book 3 in the series that this book is from. This is book 1 in that same series. I think it's called Seducing the Sedgwicks, if I'm not mistaken. But this one is essentially a male-male historical romance version of The Sound of Music. So if that sounds interesting to you, definitely check out this book. But this centers around Captain Philip Dacre. He has been out at sea working on a ship for like years, I think, and so he's coming back home. I think his ship is going to be docked for 2 months. Then we have Ben, who is a local vicar for the village that they all live in, and Philip asks Ben to live at the house while he's there to help raise his children, because his children are like out of control because they don't really have a parent. Their mother had passed away some years back, I think, and you know, obviously Philip is out to sea all the time, so they don't really have anyone looking looking after them besides like the servants. So Ben comes in to help out with that, and a romance does ensue between Ben and Philip. What I really enjoyed about this was the sort of sunshine grump trope, if you know what I'm talking about. So Ben is definitely like the sunshine character. He is just so sweet and happy and bubbly. And then we have Philip, who is a very serious man. I mean, he definitely reminds me of Captain Von Trapp from The Sound of Music. So I loved that dynamic of seeing Ben kind of soften Philip's edges and seeing Philip become a happier person. And yeah, it was a very sweet romance. I didn't enjoy it quite as much as Two Rogues Make a Right, but I still definitely recommend this. I gave it 4 stars. Next book I want to discuss is Take a Hint, Danny Brown by Talia Hibbert. This is my 4th book that I've read from her at this point. This is also book 2 in this series that centers around these 3 sisters. This book was Get a Life, Chloe Brown. I enjoyed that book. I gave it 4 stars. I'm also giving this book 4 stars, but I definitely enjoyed it more than the first book, and that's mainly because of the main characters. Danny Brown, she is a PhD student, I believe in women's studies or something along those lines. I can't remember what her exact concentration is, but yeah, she's a very serious student. Of course, she also teaches classes, as most PhD students do. And then there's this guy Zafir, who is a bodyguard at one of the buildings that she works at. And so they've been friends for quite some time. And this turns into a fake dating / friends to lovers romance. So if you're really into those tropes, I definitely would recommend this. I really loved Danny and Zafir, not only separately, but of course together. I love that Zafir has this kind of hard exterior. You know, he's a security guard and he used to play rugby. I think at one point in the book they joke about him having resting bitch face, but he is definitely a cinnamon roll on the inside. He is such a sweet guy. He also reads romance novels, which that's absolutely amazing. And yeah, I just love the dynamic between these 2 characters. I gave this 4 stars. I can't recommend it enough. It was just a really fun time, and I'm really looking forward to reading the 3rd and final book in this series when it comes out next year. Next book I read is Bringing Down the Duke by Evie Dunmore. This is book 1 in the A League of Extraordinary Women series that she is writing for Berkeley. This one centers around Annabelle. At the very beginning of this book, she has just gotten a scholarship to the University of Oxford, and this is around 1880, so I believe that this college for women is just starting out, and she gets a scholarship to go from this women's rights organization. And so in exchange for her scholarship, she of course has to attend meetings of this organization and actually go out on the front line, so to say, and try to get people on their side to get women's rights, you know, to get the right to vote and things like that. And one of their main targets is Sebastian, who is the Duke of Montgomery. And so Annabelle goes after him to try to get his support. And so the plot goes on from there. And of course, a romance ensues between the 2 of them. I don't really have much to say about this one. I gave it 4 stars. It was a very solid romance. I do think this would be a good book to start with if you've never read a historical romance, because I do think that Evie Dunmore did a good job of just explaining the kind of society that this was, and you know, the rules that women had to live by, especially in things like that. It's also definitely a more serious historical romance. The cover might lead you to believe that it's a comedy, but it's really not. This book I want to discuss is The Duke with the Dragon Tattoo by Kerrigan Byrne. This is book 6, I think, 5 or 6 in her Victorian Rebels series, and this one follows this man. He's just known as the Rook. He doesn't know his past, he doesn't know his name or anything, but he is a captain on a pirate ship, which was one of the reasons why I was attracted to this book in the first place. He just knows that he has this massive tattoo on his forearm that is of a dragon, and so he's just trying to figure out his past, but he's also looking for this treasure. And then there is Lorelei. And so about 17 years before the novel really starts, Lorelei rescues this young man who's around her age. I think she was about 14 when she rescued him. And he was like on death's door. He was in really bad shape. And so she kind of nursed him back to health. And then they ended up separating because of really crazy circumstances. So 17 years later, they do end up reuniting. Like I said, he's known as the Rook, but she knows him as Ash because that's what she called him back when she rescued him years ago. And I really enjoyed this. I gave it 4.5 stars. I actually liked it a lot more than The Highwaymen, which is the first book in this series. Everyone, I feel like, in the romance community just raves and raves about that book, and I liked it, but this one I think was better. I really loved the angst and the intensity and the drama between Lorelai and Ash. And it was also kind of fun because it is a pirate romance and I really enjoy those. So I wholeheartedly recommend this, especially if you've already read The Highwaymen, because there's a very strong connection between these two specific books in this series. Next, I'm going to talk about two nonfiction books that I read that I gave both of them 5 stars. The first one is Between the World and Me. This is by Ta-Nehisi Coates. This is kind of a letter slash memoir. He's writing a letter to his 15-year-old son, but it includes a lot of aspects from his own life when he was growing up, and he's mainly discussing what it is like to be Black in America, what it's like to be a Black man in America. This book was beautifully, beautifully written. This is definitely a book that I'm going to want to revisit at some point because I do feel like there are aspects that didn't like 100% sink in my mind. I don't know. It may make me sound stupid, but this is a very complex book. Even though it's only about 150 pages, there's just a lot going on. So yes, I wholeheartedly recommend it. It was also the winner of the National Book Award when it came out. And the other nonfiction book that I have is White Rage. This is by Carol Anderson. This is the unspoken truth of our racial divide. This is an incredible, incredible historical resource. So this book gives the real actual history surrounding the time of the Reconstruction era all the way to present day in the United States. I learned so much about our really messed up history in this country. There are some really messed up things in this book that actually happened, and I feel like nobody knows about because in school we didn't learn this stuff. You know, let's face it, school is very white-centered. The history that we end up learning is just not the real story, and that is such a shame. I didn't even learn this stuff when I was in college. I took an American history class from the Reconstruction era to present day, and I didn't learn the things that are talked about in this book. Also, I want to point out that there is a YA version of this book. I think it is called We Are Not Yet Equal. It is also written by Carol Anderson. So I would definitely recommend checking out that book as well, especially if you haven't read a lot of adult nonfiction. This book is very dense. There is a lot of information. It's only about 180 pages or so. So there's just a lot going on. There's a lot of information to take in. So if you feel like you want a more simplified version of this book, I would definitely check out We Are Not Yet Equal. Yeah, I cannot recommend this enough. I think every single person in our country needs to read this, but I also think that everyone on this planet would benefit from reading this book because there are just so many things that are talked about in this book that are just so important. So of course I couldn't give this less than 5 stars. Next, I have some other 5-star reads to talk about. The first one is What You Wish For. This is by Catherine Center. This just came out on July 14th, so this is definitely a very new release. I have read Things You Save in a Fire by the same author, absolutely adored it. So I knew going into this that I was going to really enjoy it, but I will say up front that to me this book isn't as good as Things You Save in a Fire, but it is still a really great women's fiction novel. So this one centers around Samantha. She's a school librarian in Galveston, Texas, and this guy, Duncan, that she had a crush on when they worked together at another school some years back, he ends up being the new school principal at the school that she is currently working at in Galveston, and she notices that he has changed quite a bit because when they worked together some years back, he was just this goofy, fun-loving guy, just an absolutely amazing person. That's why she had a crush on him. Duncan shows up to this new school and he's just dressed in like a gray suit. He is very serious, kind of a mean person. He definitely shakes things up at this school and not in a good way. And so the plot goes on from there. Of course, this is a romance between Duncan and Samantha, and I enjoyed it so much. I've realized that Catherine Center writes like the epitome of a comfort read. I just enjoy her writing style and the way that she writes her stories, and this is just such a heartwarming book, but at the same time it does cover some pretty hard-hitting issues. You know, there is discussion about gun violence and things like that, so I would be aware of that before going into this book. And like I said, I didn't enjoy it as much as Things You Save in a Fire just because I feel like, I don't know, maybe the story and the characters didn't have as much depth as that book. I'm not really sure, but I still enjoyed it a lot. I gave it 5 stars. I do think looking back on it, it might be more of a 4.5, but I think I'm just gonna stick with my rating of 5 stars. Next 5-star read I have is Like a Love Story. This is by Abdi Nizamian. So this takes place in 1989 in New York City. This book definitely centers around the AIDS epidemic. We have our main characters of Reza. So he has just moved from Canada with his mother to live with his new stepfather and stepbrother, and he knows he's gay. I think he's kind of always known that he's gay, but he is just terrified of that because of the AIDS epidemic, the fact that epidemic is disproportionately affecting members of the LGBTQ+ community. So he is terrified of who he is, but then he goes to his high school and he meets Judy and Art. Art is an openly gay teen, and Judy is Art's best friend. She's actually plus sized and she's an aspiring fashion designer. So I loved this book so much. I think it is absolutely stunning. I actually cried towards the end of this because, I mean, obviously this book covers a lot of hard-hitting topics. There's also this really great side character who is Judy's uncle named Steven, and he kind of helped Art out when Art was figuring out who he is, you know, figuring out that he is gay. And I just loved the friendship between Reza, Judy, and Art. And then there is a romance that develops between Reza and Art that I thought was just beautiful as well. So I can't recommend this enough if you love YA contemporary. I just thought it was a stunning, stunning book. And the last book that I want to discuss in this video is My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. Whew, okay, so this book quite literally took over my life for the 3 days that I was reading this. I did listen to the audiobook at the same time that I was reading the physical book. First of all, I wholeheartedly recommend the audiobook because there is a fantastic interview with the audiobook narrator and Kate Elizabeth Russell herself. I think it was about like 30 minutes long, and it clarified a lot of things for me in terms of this book. So I definitely recommend that. Also, the narrator just did such a fantastic job of bringing Vanessa's story to life, and I really felt like I was in Vanessa's head, partly because of how good of a job the narrator did. So this is a very dark literary fiction novel. This is about Vanessa, and this takes place in both 2000 and present day in 2017. In 2000, Vanessa was 15 years old. She was going to this private boarding school, and she started this affair with her 42-year-old English teacher named Jacob Strain. And then in 2017, and now these other young women have come out and accused Jacob Strain of abusing them as well. So this book is a lot about Vanessa coming to terms with the fact that she was abused. Of course, it goes into detail about how this affair started between her and her teacher. This book goes into incredibly dark places. Of course, there's a content warning for grooming, sexual assault, things along those lines. I wrote a very, very detailed review of this on Goodreads that I'm actually pretty proud of, so I always link my Goodreads down in the description below if you want to check out that review. But wow, I mean, this book was incredibly, incredibly written. You can tell that Kate Elizabeth Russell just knows what she's doing. I think she has like a PhD in creative writing, and you can just tell by the way that she wrote this book. I think that this book took her like years and years to write, because I'm pretty sure in that interview she talked about how she started writing this book when she was like 16 or 17. It's not a book that I recommend for everyone because, like I said, it goes into some incredibly dark places. There are times when it made me feel sick to my stomach. This book also made me want to just punch somebody. I was so just angry for Vanessa. The last 15 pages of this novel are absolutely incredible because this is really when Vanessa starts her healing process, and by the very end, you also feel lighter and clearer, just like Vanessa is beginning to. So I just think that the ending alone makes this whole book worth it. All right, guys, that's it for my end of July reading wrap up. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you would also leave a comment down below if you want to discuss any of the books that I brought up in this video. I would also love it if you would consider liking and subscribing, and I thank you in advance if you do. And with that being said, I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!